Mr. President.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, may I inquire if the Senate is presently in a quorum call?
We are not.
In that case, may I ask unanimous consent to speak for up to 15 minutes as if in morning business?
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. On Monday night, we confirmed former Georgia Governor Sonny Perdue to be President Trump's Secretary of Agriculture. And I am here for my 164th time to wake up speech to urge Secretary Perdue to listen to his agency and to scientific researchers in farm states across the country and to our major food and agricultural producers and to farmers, fishermen, ranchers, and foresters about the serious and growing effects of climate change. Carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuels is changing the atmosphere and oceans. We see it everywhere. We see it in drought-stricken farms and raging wildfires. We see it in fish disappearing from warming, acidifying waters. We see it in our dying pine forests. We see it in extreme weather events. Secretary Perdue is taking the helm of an agency with a key role in mitigating those very effects. USDA provides farmers, foresters, commodities markets, and state and local officials with analysis of trends and emerging issues affecting agriculture, food supply, the environment, and rural communities. In its own climate change adaptation plan, the department notes, and I quote, "Climate change has the potential to confound USDA efforts to meet its core obligations and responsibilities to the nation." Now, during his tenure as governor, Secretary Perdue issued a state energy strategy, saying that, and I quote him here, "Strong scientific evidence exists that increasing emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases are affecting Earth's climate." Encouraging. But when asked as a Trump nominee by Senator Leahy about climate change during the Secretary's confirmation process, he backpedaled and said, "It is clear that the climate has been changing, but there is significant debate within the scientific community on whether human activities play a role in that." Whoops. That's the classic denier dodge. And it's just not true. Secretary Perdue said several times during the confirmation process that he will use the best scientific and statistical data available to make decisions. Well, the National Climate Assessment uses the best scientific and statistic data to conclude this: in the long term, combined stresses associated with climate change are expected to decrease agricultural productivity. In the Midwest, for instance, the National Climate Assessment reports that temperatures are increasing and the rate of warming tripled between 1980 and 2010. Under the assessment's worst-case scenarios, temperatures across the Midwest are projected to rise 8.5 degrees Fahrenheit by the year 2100. If you're a farmer, 8.5 degrees changes everything. In the western mountains, massive forests stand dead on the mountainsides as warmer winters allow the killer bark beetle to swarm into higher latitudes and higher altitudes. Over 82 million acres of national forest are under stress from these insects or from fires, many of which result from the dead trees or both. Ominously, the assessment says that the combined effects of increasing wildfire, insect outbreaks, and diseases is expected to cause, and I'll quote them here, almost complete loss of subalpine forests. The cost to taxpayers of fighting fires in those dead and dying forests is growing dramatically. Firefighting has gone from just 13% of the Forest Service budget in 2004 to over 50% in 2015. The Forest Service estimates that by 2025, fighting fires will take up 2/3 of its budget. Forest Service Chief Tom Tidwell testified to the Senate that, I quote, "This increase in the cost of wildland fire suppression is subsuming the agency's budget and jeopardizing its ability to implement its full mission." One place where Secretary Perdue can go to find out a little bit about this is from our state universities. The University of Wyoming Center for Environmental Hydrology and Geophysics, for example, reports that, and I'll quote them here, "Many of the most pressing issues facing the western United States hinge on the fate and transport of water and its response to diverse disturbances, including climate change." At Kansas State University, Professor of Agronomy Charles Rice is using climate modeling to help anticipate climate effects in the Great Plains and to help the region mitigate and adapt to those effects. In Wisconsin, Victor Cabrera, an assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison Dairy Science Department, says that higher summer temperatures and increasing drought will interfere with both livestock fertility and milk production. And dairy cows could give as much as 10% less milk. Secretary Perdue's own Department of Agriculture predicts that by 2030, climate change will cost the U.S. dairy sector between $79 million and $199 million per year in lost production. South Dakota State University professor Mark Cochran is working with the Forest Service to better understand how a changing climate is affecting our forests. Professor Cochran reported that forest fire seasons worldwide increased by 18.7% due to more rain-free days and hotter temperatures. Secretary Perdue could travel to Iowa, and there he would hear from Gene Takel, an Iowa State University professor of agronomy and geologic and atmospheric sciences, who told a United Nations conference recently that climate change is already affecting Iowa farmers. "This isn't just about the distant future," he said. And at Iowa State's Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture, Secretary Perdue could hear about what the center calls, I'll quote them, "aggravated and unpredictable risk that will challenge the security of our agricultural and biological systems." Let me say that again. Iowa State University Leopold Center foresees aggravated and unpredictable risk that will challenge the security of our agricultural and biological systems. I'm from the ocean state, so let's turn to the oceans, where the National Climate Assessment predicts that fishing costs are predicted to increase as fisheries transition to new species and as processing plants and fishing jobs shift poleward. In the Pacific Northwest, ocean acidification caused a 70% loss of oyster larvae from 2006 to 2008 at an oyster hatchery in Oregon. Wild oyster stocks in Washington state have failed as weather patterns bring more acidic water to the shore. This is an industry worth about $73 million annually, so we ought not to laugh this off. In Alaska, the University of Alaska has an ocean acidification research center. That's how seriously they take it. The Ocean Acidification Research Center warns that ocean acidification, quote, has the potential to disrupt the Alaskan seafood industry from top to bottom. Top to bottom disruption of one of Alaska's major industries, and we can't get a word on climate change out of the Republican side of the aisle in this building. It's, of course, not just scientists. Some of the largest agriculture and food companies are speaking out as well. For these companies, climate change is not a partisan issue. It's not even a political issue. It is a business survival issue. It is their new reality. In 2015, major food and beverage companies visited Congress to tell us how climate change is affecting their industry. Climate really matters to our business, said Kim Nelson of General Mills. We fundamentally rely on Mother Nature. The choices we make to protect or forsake our climate, she said, will be important to the long-term viability of our company and our industry. Paul Bacus of Nestle agreed, saying climate change is impacting our business today. His company cans pumpkins under the Libby's brand. They have seen pumpkin yields crash in the United States. Mr. Bacus told us we have never seen growing and harvesting conditions like this in the Midwest. Chief Sustainability Officer for the Mars Corporation, Barry Parkin, was blunter in his assessment. We are on a path to a dangerous place. Greg Page, the former CEO of Cargill, has publicly stated that climate change must be addressed to prevent future food shortages. Specifically, he said, and I quote, U.S. production of corn, soybeans, wheat, and cotton could decline by 14% by mid-century and by as much as 42% by late century. From an agricultural standpoint, we have to prepare ourselves for a different climate than we have today. In advance of the Paris Climate Conference, the heads of Mars, General Mills, Nestle USA, Unilever, Kellogg Company, New Belgium Brewing, Ben & Jerry's, Cliff Bar, Stonyfield Farm, Dannon Dairy, PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, Hershey, and Hain Celestial signed a public letter, this one here, that said, and I quote, climate change is bad for farmers and agriculture. Drought, flooding, and hotter growing conditions threaten the world's food supply and contribute to food insecurity. They continued, now is the time to meaningfully address the reality of climate change. We are ready to meet the climate challenges that face our businesses. These big, successful companies don't take climate change lightly, and neither do our farmers, loggers, ranchers, and fishermen. In South Carolina, farms that have been in families for generations, like that of Representative Mark Sanford, are under threat from climate change. Congressman Sanford said, at our family farm in Beaufort, I've watched over the last 50 years as sea levels have risen and affected salt edges of the farm. Out west, ranchers are experiencing longer and more severe droughts. In a 2012 survey of southern Colorado ranchers, roughly a quarter of respondents said they would likely leave the industry if the drought persisted. Carlisle Currier, who owns a ranch in Molina, Colorado, said, we just can't grow enough to feed the cattle ourselves. In New Hampshire, Jamie French, president of Northland Forest Products, has seen hardwood tree species begin to migrate, with less valuable timber trees like oak and hickory beginning to take the place of sugar maple and yellow birch. And I sure hope Secretary Perdue will come to Rhode Island and meet our fishermen. Chris Brown is the owner of Brown Family Seafood and the president of the Rhode Island Commercial Fishermen's Association. He has fished in the waters of Rhode Island Sound for years. We used to come right here and catch 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 pounds of whiting a day, sometimes 10, he told the New York Times. But the whiting have moved north to cooler waters. Quote, climate change is going to make it hard on some of those species that are not particularly fond of warm or warming waters, Chris said. And he's not alone. I've been told by other fishermen that it's getting weird out there in Rhode Island's waters, that this is not my grandfather's ocean. These changes are serious for this industry. So I hope that Secretary Perdue will hear the message of our farmers, foresters, ranchers, and fishermen. They are sending this message loud and clear. Climate change is happening now, and they count on us to face the challenge. The problem, of course, is the fossil fuel-funded denial machine that has so much influence over the Republican Party in Congress today. That fossil fuel-funded denial machine will do its best to change the subject, to muddy the waters, to create artificial doubt, and to use its anonymous, dark political money to break up and thwart any signs of progress. But all the dark money in the world can't change the things that Iowa farmers, Wyoming ranchers, South Dakota forest managers, and Rhode Island fishermen see. If this body, if our Republican friends here won't listen to Mars Corporation, to General Mills, to Nestle USA, to Unilever, to Kellogg, to Coke and Pepsi and Hershey, it's really time to wake up, Mr. President. I yield the floor.